You will now begin Module 3, which is Section 4 of the Para Handbook.
So with that, we're going to go into behavior management and STOIC. All of our teachers in our district have had training in CHAMPS, which is a way to support students in consistently following directions and having explicit expectations for students to be successful. And with that comes STOIC. STOIC is structuring the environment, teaching the expectations, observing student behavior, interacting positively, and correctly giving correction feedback fluently. So structure the setting to match your expectations and your goals for the environment or activity. So we want to make sure that students are positioned to be able to focus and participate on the learning activity. A lot of times with our students with special needs that have a hard time attending, this means making sure that items aren't distracting to them that are in their presence. A lot of times if I'm working in a small group with a small group of students, I want my students to be facing the wall and me to be facing out so I can see all the other kids. And that just helps them from, I'm able to monitor the whole class or maybe support the classroom teacher in kind of keeping things safe in the classroom, but the students are able to truly just attend to that work in front of them on their desk because all they have in front of them is the wall. So providing engaging activities that allow all students to provide answers frequently during the activity. This is something really important to think about if you're working with students who have are nonverbal or minimally verbal, or maybe just have a hard time being expressive in a classroom setting. And what that might look like is being able to give thumbs up and thumbs down if you disagree and agree, or it might be writing on a whiteboard your answer, or it might be raising your hand instead of just accessing what kids know using verbal output, because oftentimes the same kids will always be the ones to raise their hands and answer questions in that format. And reduce downtime. That is a huge factor because when students don't have anything to do, or don't know what the expectation is of what they need to do, they will find something to do. And it is typically not what we want them to do. So just something to think about there. Work with your team to determine goals and expectations for individual students you work with. So depending on the student, it might be that you're wanting them to follow the classroom expectations and complete a modified assignment. It might be that you're just asking them to sit and listen to instruction, participate and respond appropriately, or participate in classroom instruction with the support of sensory and self-regulation. So some of our students might go into inclusion for different reasons. Some might go in to access the curriculum in a modified way, or some might just go in for the social experience and to listen and kind of be immersed in their grade level curriculum, where others might be completely on target, but they just need some sensory and self-regulation support. And so that's what the para would be there for. So those are all examples and things to think about when you're working with your students. And again, if you know their IEP goals, you know their modifications, accommodations, and the why, what we're working toward with this student, you'll be more successful in supporting them. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So oftentimes we have this, well, my supervising teacher told me X, or my gen ed teacher told me this. But sometimes we don't even communicate because the world is going so fast, the classroom's going so fast, expectations change quickly, maybe your student caseload changes. And so just make sure that you are communicating on a regular basis. You're sharing the data that you're getting from your students. You're sharing what you're observing in the classroom to support them in being successful. Teach expected behaviors. Make sure students know how much they can talk and move during the activity. Make sure students know how to ask for help. So each classroom, and that's one of the difficulties of being a para, is each classroom runs itself differently depending on the teacher's expectations, or maybe the building's expectations, or the student's needs in that classroom. So just make sure that you know exactly how your student is to ask for help in their classroom, or how they're supposed to support or act in the classroom is very helpful. And always ask clarifying questions to your teachers so that you can best support the students that you are helping. So this is just an example. Again, remember, I told you the more that you are engaged in learning, the more likely you are to keep the learning. So I want you to take a piece of paper and make a ball. I'm assuming, just from doing this activity live, that you probably made a ball like this. You just scrunched up paper and this is your ball, right? If not, maybe you are an exceptional student. But most people either do this or they draw a circle on a paper. And I respond with, no, I told you guys to make a ball. And so they try again and they're very frustrated. This is to simulate how frustrated our students can be, but also how frustrated we can be when our supervising teachers might tell us, we need you to do this, but you don't understand the expectation. Same with a student. We're asking them to do something, but then they don't understand what that actually means, because this is the actual ball I wanted you to make. I wanted you to make an inflatable origami ball. Now, all of you could make this if you had the instruction and the specific explicit instruction of how each step goes to make this ball, but without that explicit instruction, you would not be able to make it. And so that's the same as saying to a student, go line up. A kindergarten student may not know what go line up means until we model and explicitly teach them what go line up means. Or write in your agenda for an older kid what you need to do for the end of the day. Without an explicit example of what that looks like, they might not be able to do it. So this is just to help you remember that you want to make sure that what you're asking of the students is very explicit and very direct. They know exactly what to expect, and it is consistent what you need them to do. When directions are given, wait long enough to see if students are following directions. This goes along with that assuming or presuming competence. We want to make sure that we are presuming that they can do it before we jump in and be that helicopter parent and do it for them. We want to circulate throughout the room in unpredictable patterns. The importance of that is so that we can kind of minimize that behavior. In the next section, you'll hear me talk about visual supports and prompting, and we know that proximity matters. So being engaged, being present, and watching your students and assisting them in the moment of maybe disengagement or noncompliance is very important, because the quicker we recorrect, the better off we are versus getting them into a very disengaged space. Frequently scan all settings in the classroom by visually sweeping any place students are present. So just kind of looking around to make sure students are engaged and supported, and develop observation habits where students expect that they could be observed with you within any second. So again, and I think I share this in the next slide too, but making sure that you are always present. It's easy when kids are doing maybe their in-seat work to get off task and check your messages on your phone or check social media. But when you're doing those things, the students are more likely to also be disengaged. So just making sure that you are always present and monitoring how they're doing and giving them that feedback. Give a command and wait 10 seconds. This is a very good example that's brought to us by Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is an adult with pretty significant autism. It impairs her quite a lot. And she is now verbal, wasn't when she was younger, but she shares that just the neurotypical ear canal versus her ear canal, how many more veins and more spots are on it. She's pointing to it in the picture versus the one that goes straight to the brain. And so our kids with autism, we just want to make sure that we give them enough time, because what she describes is if somebody gives her direction like, hey, I need you to sit down, if you don't wait that 10 seconds and you say it again, I told you to sit down, or what were you supposed to do, or just prompted in another way, then that starts all over again in her brain, and it doesn't give her time to process and do what is asked of her. So it looks like noncompliance, but in reality, it's just her trying to figure out what's being asked of her. And here's a core decision-making tree. This is brought to us by Kyle, and he just wanted you to know to use this decision-making tree to make sure you're effective in the role that you are as a para. So when you walk into a classroom, you're going to ask yourself, are the students I'm responsible in this room? And if they are, then you're going to go and see what they need and move forward on the down on the chain. But if they're not there, you're going to check with the teacher and see if there's other places you need to be. Same goes for if you are in the classroom, you do have students that you need to support. You look at them and they need help, you're going to help them. If they don't look like they're needing help, then you're just going to provide active supervision. So often as a paraeducator or even a special education teacher, we think we are not doing our job if we are not talking with the students, engaging with the students. But sometimes our job is just to sit back and actively supervise for when they do need us. By actively supervising in that capacity, we're presuming competence, we're building their confidence, and we're helping them become independent. So just making sure we use active supervision as an actual job. That is part of our job. Sometimes we just have to wait students out and not necessarily engage with them. True or false? As a paraprofessional, you must always be doing something. If you aren't doing something, you aren't doing your job. You're not working. And I am hopeful that you said false, because active supervision is your job. Sometimes you have to wait students out to build their confidence and teach compliance and independence. Now we're going to get into the prompting hierarchy. The prompting hierarchy is a way to ensure that our students are getting their just right level of support in each given moment. It ebbs and flows from anything from full physical all the way down to the natural teacher cue. We're going to go into the next couple slides so that you can see exactly what that means. So a natural teacher cue is the least intrusive way to support a student. It is truly just to help the student cue into what the general ed teacher is doing, or the lead teacher in that classroom. For example, if the lights go off and that procedure for all kids means voices off and freeze, you're going to have your voice off and freeze as a model, but also to support the student in following the natural cues. Or if the class needs to put up a signal for eyes on teacher, you will help your student put their signal on eyes on teacher. Some students are able to access these natural teacher cues without our support. It is easy to get in that habit of supporting them just because we think that's our job in that moment. But I encourage you to avoid being a parrot para. Avoid saying exactly what the teacher said just to help your student. Your student has the ability to listen to the lead teacher, and we want them to be able to do so to be independent and successful in their environment. Direct verbal and indirect verbal supports are the next least intrusive. A direct verbal is when you tell them specifically what you want verbally. An indirect verbal is when you say things like, "What do you need to do to be ready right now?" instead of being very explicit by saying, "Open your book to page 48." Avoid stating the directive as a question. When we state it as a question, it gives the students an opportunity to choose not to. For example, if you say, "Can you turn your book to page 48?" The kid says, "No, I don't want to." But if instead you are very assertive and you say, "Open your book to page 48, there is no ability for them to argue with the directive. Visual gestural prompts are one of my favorite ways to build independence. When we use visual and gestural prompts, we basically fade our support and are able to help that child be independent more quickly. For example, a visual support might be a quiet signal that's on your badge, or maybe a gesture with just your lips, your finger over your lips. Those types of gestures are much more easily faded than verbally telling a student what to do. When you verbally remind a student what to do in each moment, they think that they always need your verbal support in the classroom. If you visually give it to them or gesturally, you can easily fade that. For example, a visual could go from me doing this, gesturing, to just tapping the table with the quiet symbol on their desk, to that quiet symbol remains on their desk at all times to remind them to be quiet during instruction. One thing I like to tell my teachers and paras is that if you have something that you constantly are saying, you want to stop that broken record. Everything that you say always and often could probably be changed with a visual. For example, one of our preschool classrooms had a student who was a runner. They liked to leave the classroom without permission, so they would get to the door. So on the door we put, "Opening doors is an adult job. Stop." Another example is in a kindergarten classroom, we have a water fountain. Of course, kids want to go to the water fountain independently and on their own, but we don't want them to access that during instruction. So a bucket with a stop sign is over the water fountain. Other examples might be stop for teacher on a teacher's computer, or the other example here on the right is come in when we're open. This is a visual for a housekeeping or pretend play center in a preschool classroom. The goal is to work toward independence through the use of UDL supports. A UDL is Universal Design for Learning. What we like to think of is how are we going to help our special needs students access the visuals they need to be successful in life without our additional support or adaptations. On the screen here, you can see Pride Time procedures that have been written out with visuals and specifics for students in our life skills classroom. We want to work toward them being able to use the UDL support, which would be what is posted in every classroom on the right there with the Pride Time routines. Proximity makes a big difference. You can't argue with the visuals. I like to think of this particular example as, how likely is it that you are going to stop at a stop sign when there's a police officer right behind you? Pretty likely, right? Whereas if you're going home and your last stop sign right before your house doesn't have a police officer behind you, you might be less likely to stop and look both ways very effectively. So just think of that when you are working with students. The more engaged, the more present you are, the better and the more likely your students are to engage in the instruction. For example, if you are doing a non-example of a good para and you are on your phone texting or maybe looking at social media, what's the likelihood of the student to comply with teacher adult directives and engage? Not as likely as if you are circling the classroom, giving support, giving visuals of thumbs up to encourage them, or maybe a tap on the shoulder to help them engage. Modeling. Modeling is just what it means. Modeling is when you are modeling exactly what you want the student to do. Oftentimes in an inclusive classroom, this is a really good key to helping students cue in to the general education teacher. It can be easy to get distracted, like I said before, get on your phone or maybe talk to another adult in the room, but that does not help your student learn how to engage. They respect you and they look up to you, and it's very important for you to model what it is that needs to be done. For example, if you are supporting a kid in a music classroom, you should be singing, doing the actions, prompting the student to do the actions, prompting the student to be quiet when the teacher's talking, all of those types of things to help the student be most successful. Partial physical prompting. This is fairly intrusive, and I want to caution you when you use this support. Partial physical prompting is when you give just light support. As you can see on the screen, she is just giving kind of a on the forearm, trying to support the student in learning to tie their shoes. A nudge to get them started is an okay thing, but we want to fade that over time. A good example of a full physical prompt is making sure that you're doing it hand under hand. So you want to make sure that your hand is, if this is the student's hand, your hand is underneath it helping them. Because if your hand's on top of it helping them, then they are likely to see that they can't do it without your support. They're going to need they think they need your hand to help them get started in support. So you always want to go underneath. And that ends up being a partial physical prompt as you move your arm back further, maybe to the elbow or just to the shoulder. Prompting should ebb and flow based on needs, goals, and situations. This is a huge thing to think about. So the prompting hierarchy is just that. It's a hierarchy. You use some of the prompts very often, which would maybe be the modeling or just helping students engage in the natural teacher cue, where some of them you might use very infrequently, the full physical prompt or the physical prompt. I encourage you, if you're finding yourself using the more intrusive prompting often, I encourage you to talk to your teacher and your general ed support staff and ask, how could we do this differently? I seem to be supporting my student way too much within the classroom. They are not able to be independent. However, there are times when you have to physically support, maybe for safety or to teach them a skill that they have been trying to learn for a very long time. You just want to make sure that you are giving them the just right level of support, because remember, our end goal is to help them be independent as you champion for all students. Fostering independence is the key. This logo actually was created a couple years ago. You can actually purchase shirts with it on it, but it was just, what does special ed mean to our students? And a lot of co-op employees were able to come up with different words that it meant. And so it looks like a graduation cap, because that is our end goal, to help all kids succeed and be independent and be able to be successful adults. We encourage you to avoid being a para. Remember, that's the para that says the exact same thing the teacher says each time. That makes the child feel like they need you to say it, and they can't access the teacher's directive. A better way to approach that would be if you're in a fifth grade classroom and the teacher says, I want everyone to get out their math book and their projectors and pencils. It might be to point to the kid that is doing it and show your student, hey, this is what they're doing. You need to get out your book. But you don't need to repeat exactly what the teacher said. That is just going to encourage that student to think, I'm going to wait until my para tells me what to do. My para is my teacher. I want the students to believe that their teacher is their teacher and the paras are there for their support. And avoid being that helicopter para. As we talked in former sections, just making sure that you're presuming competence. Don't jump in there right away and help. I know it's hard because we want to be helpers and we realize that that's our job to help kids be successful. But sometimes just waiting and sitting back to see if they can do it on their own is your job, just to see what they can do and how they can be successful independently. The more successful they are independently, the more likely they will be to get a job, to build their confidence, to get to build partnerships and friendships with others in their class. Work yourself out of a job. There are always more students to serve, so don't worry if you are really using the prompting hierarchy and students are becoming independent. That's what we want to see. Be mindful in an inclusive setting. Paraproximity can interfere with ownership. So sometimes if we're very helicopter-ish or para-ing, the student can start to feel like, oh, my teacher is actually the para, not the teacher. And the teacher can start to think that too and kind of step back. And our job is to make sure that our students have an inclusive education with their peers. It also can separate students from classmates. Sometimes if we're super invasive and super supporting our students, the other kids in the classroom might think that Johnny doesn't need any friends. Johnny has Miss Smith, the para, helping him as his friend, or it just may be hard to approach the student. So just be thinking about that, and just creating that dependence on adults is not a good thing that we want to see for kids. We also want to make sure that we limit the amount of we don't limit the amount of peer interactions with our students. So when the student is interacting with peers, if it's an appropriate time, don't jump in there and talk with the student. Let them have their moment with their peers. At that same time, if there's moments where you need to model how to be a good peer, or if you need to support other students that are general ed students, that is completely okay. We like to be inclusive in that way too. I like to see that when I'm walking into a classroom, I can't tell who that para is specifically hired for. I see that para just being a support and assistance for the classroom. That said, just like we talked in other sections, make sure that's what your lead special ed teacher and your general education teacher partners want from you. Some of them may have a different teaching style or have a very important reason why you shouldn't engage with one of the other students that are gen ed. So just making sure that it's always an open communication to support you in being successful. And one thing that we do want to discuss, this will be discussed for teachers or paras that are hired for specific programs like maybe our alternative school or our life skills programs. If needed, you'll go through what's called emergency safety intervention procedures, and you'll get CPI training. So back up, I'm sorry. Emergency safety interventions, all of you will get and have to get that training. That's just to ensure that we are safely helping students and not physically restraining or secluding students. And then the staff who need crisis prevention intervention training, those might be our alternative paras or our paras that work in an alternative classroom behavior setting or a life skills setting. If you have questions or concerns about either of these things, or if you see something in the classroom that you're like, that wasn't an appropriate prompt or support, please reach out to your supervising teacher and discuss that with them so you can get some resolve. We want to make sure that all students are safe and independent as possible. Adult attention is very reinforcing for students. Just make sure that what you're doing is supporting the student and being independent in their general education setting, and you're not unknowingly starting some situations where students are getting in bad habits and needing your adult attention. for reasons that they wouldn't normally need that attention. You should interact with students 3 times more often during positive behavior than in corrective inappropriate behavior. So that's something to think about. Sometimes it can be hard, but we want to make sure that the kids have a positive experience in the classroom. So make sure that you are giving feedback that is positive, is praising and encouraging them 3 times more than you are having to correct them. There are 2 types of positive interactions, behavior-specific praise and neighborly interaction. So behaviorally specific praise would be when you're praising them and noticing them for their good work. I like the way you followed along during math today. Nice job listening to the teacher throughout science today. Those type of directives. Where a neighborly interaction is when we're just building that relationship with our students. So that might be, good morning, Johnny, how was your weekend? Or, hey, how was your day today? I saw that you went to PE. How was that? Those types of interactions that just help the child know that you care about them. Correct fluently. Just making sure that your corrections are consistent and they are immediately followed. So whenever you're correcting a student, it's much more purposeful and engaging if you're correcting them within that moment or right after that moment versus, hey, yesterday I saw da 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 da, instead of being in the moment. The child may not remember that or be able to give the feedback. Also, just making sure that you have a good body stance, that you're standing not necessarily controlling the student, but just assertively standing for them so that they recognize that you are an adult of authority and that they should respect you and comply with your directives. This is just a chart that our Hayes schools use just to say, kind of help us make sure that we're consistently supporting students in the same manner. Sometimes our students with special needs or maybe behavioral concerns, we might think of their behaviors as so significant, or we might be like, oh, they do them every day, so that's not a significant behavior. And so this is a chart that just helps us make sure that we're consistently looking at behaviors of students. So behaviors that are at a level 1 are just making sure that the student is sitting appropriately in their chair and those types of things. And that is handled within just regular classroom instruction. Where minors and majors, minors are make sure the teacher takes data on those, and then the major are things that are reportable that we need to have the administration in the building support us with. These are things that the teacher will help you through, but I just wanted to put it up on the screen so you knew and were aware of it. Presume competence and compliance. So this is just an example of kind of giving that directive and then waiting for compliance, because if we have that thought that they're never going to comply, then they're more than likely not going to be able to do it. So for example, Maya, please get your materials out and start working. And then you're going to wait 3 seconds. If they comply, you're going to encourage them. You're going to reinforce what good behavior of compliance they had. If they don't, you could say, I need you to get out your materials and get started. You're going to wait 3 to 5 seconds. And if they comply, you're going to reinforce. If they don't comply, you're going to follow through with the consequence. And that's where your teacher, your general ed teacher, and your special ed teachers that you partner with will have a plan either through the classroom or through the individual. So maybe as a classroom, if you don't comply with that directive, the assignment gets put in a bin and you have to do it during some preferred time that other kids might get to have some free choice time. Or maybe it's an individual situation where the student is escorted or helped to leave the classroom to get that accomplished in their special ed classroom. So just having that presuming competence and waiting for a student to comply before giving that next directive. We all want our kids to be successful, so sometimes we jump in too quickly. So we just want to make sure that you're taking a few seconds to see if they comply before you move on to the next thing. Everything you do, everything I do, and everything your students do happens for a reason. All of our behaviors are communicating something. Some behaviors may be trying to communicating wanting access to something, access to attention, items, activities, sensory stimulation, or a break. Other behaviors may be trying to communicate wanting to escape or avoid something. Maybe it is to escape or avoid work, social situations, a sensory experience, or a transition. It's important to think about this whenever you're working with students. They aren't trying to be mean to you or trying not to comply. They have something that they are trying to communicate through their behavior. So it's very important that we think about that as we work with our students. Practice the Q-tip method. Quit taking it personally. It is not about us. In the moment of a student not being able to comply or not being able to follow a direction, it's not that they're trying to give you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And it is our opportunity to teach them a new strategy or support them to self-regulate and calm so that they can comply with the directive. Every child deserves a champion, and this is something we started with at the beginning of these modules, and I just want to conclude with it. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists they become the best they can possibly be. And that's where paras can make that happen. Paras are with our students way more than our teachers are able to be one-on-one and in a more personal relationship setting. So it's so important that you build those relationships and you help your students know that they can succeed. If you need more information to be a champion for your students and be the best para you can be, you're welcome to continue to grow your craft by checking out books in our lending library. It's on the 3rd floor at the board office, or also reading the quarterly para newsletter that will just help you with tips and tricks and also support you with what's up next and different types of in-services that you might be a part of. That concludes our Module 3. Complete your reflection on the 3rd module, so you'll answer the 3rd question, and then sign the agreement that is in the back of your handbook. So that would be right back here. Sign that, and then turn both of those in to us at the board office, either myself or Karen Smith. If you need help doing that, check with your office staff in your building on how to do it through interschool mail or how to scan it in, or ask your supervising teacher to help you. We thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to all the best in your new position. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. We want you to love your job because you are good at your job, and it continues that cycle of amazingness for our students so that you can be a champion for them, every student, every day.